back in Bentonville, Arkansas at the Master Bike Builder Show, and really super stoked to have Steve Domahidy here with us today. And we're going to get into this incredible bike, but I just want to make sure we take note that Steve still has like hair that hasn't combed his hair yet, so that's just a little aside. He's still a beautiful person, and again, I go on about Steve every once in a while because in all my years of doing this stuff, talking about bikes, there's a few people who literally sincerely stand out as visionaries for bicycle design and technology. He's one of them. And, you know, his name's not well known like, you know, Fisher or Richie or anyone else, Colnago, but he's the behind the scenes guy that's just put some bikes on the planet that are just amazing, amazing bikes to look at and to ride. Steve, welcome to Arkansas.
Thank you. That was an incredible intro. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, well, you know, you got a cute dog, so. Before we get into this bike, just tell us a little bit of background on, you know, in terms of, I mean, you're a complete bike nut. When we were talking on the phone, when we talked about this bike, you know, one of the things that, again, I find so especially intriguing about you is, I mean, in terms of, there's certain people, again, Gary Fisher's another one, where it's like, you know, he'll talk about some stinking bottom bracket from 1957 that's, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you have really this encyclopedic mind of mountain bike and road bike product because you've been successful in both road and mountain. But just give us a quick little sort of a, you know, where did it all begin with you?
Man, since I was a kid, just fascinated by bikes and the incredible engineering of what a bike is, you know, just how it propels you from point A to point B. And I've just always been fascinated by that whole concept. And I've just kind of made it my mission to sort of learn and evaluate bikes from a very early age. You know, when I was a kid in high school, instead of getting a job at a grocery store bagging groceries, I was like, I'm going to get a job at a bike store. And I just went to a bike store and found one finally that was like willing to train me. And I learned how to build wheels and was the Race Across America mechanic for a rider at the Race Across America in the early 90s. And, you know, I moved to Los Angeles and ended up just kind of immersing myself in all things bike and just kind of, I have a pretty good, you know, I just kind of like make it a mission to sort of know as much as I can. Never know everything, right? Like it's just a huge volume of information out there, but I just try to like study everything that I can about bikes and how they work and why they work and what works and what doesn't work. And
what was your first foray like into being into the bike industry, like in terms of working, like designing a bike for a company?
First foray was with Alan Goldsmith gave me an opportunity at Supergo to design an in-house brand. And Alan, back in the day in the 90s, actually had a license from Horst Leitner to do the Horse Link, even before Specialized bought it. So even after Specialized bought it, he was kind of grandfathered in. Him and like AMP were still able to kind of like use the Horse Link. And he kind of knew from me, I was working at Supergo at the time, and he knew that I had this encyclopedic knowledge, and people in the shop would use me as like their like
go-to guy.
Like, Steve, what size seat post is this Specialized? And I would just know it off the top of my head. That was back because Specialized was mostly 30.9. But you know, he just understood. He saw value in me that I really understood bikes and geometry and what worked and stuff. And he said, Steve, why don't you go to Taiwan? I'll send you to Taiwan and work with this factory and design this bike for Access, was his in-house brand. And I did. I went to Taiwan and worked with them for like a week on the design of this new Horse Link bike. Turned out Specialized ended up calling Alan and saying like, please don't launch that bike. We were the number one Specialized dealer in the nation at the time. And they just really didn't want us to like come out with a competing full suspension bike that would like like implode their sales, you know, as an in-house brand. So so that was
so funny because Specialized is always so open to competition.
Super open to it. They love it. They cherish the competition. So then after that, I went and worked for SRAM for a year. I was a outside marketing rep for them out of Southern California, and did a lot of race support and you know, mechanicking for pro racers and stuff at the Norba Nationals in the day. And then Alan, at that point in time, had already started the Wayless and Scatante programs, and he realized he just was not in touch with the latest, greatest, and what was cool, and how to make those bikes really like succeed. So he hired me back to Supergo to oversee those the road bike Scatante and the mountain bike Access and Wayless Scatante. So Yeah, so then I product managed those and also designed them. Um, Alan was super. Alan, the story goes, Alan Goldsmith at Supergo wanted to carry Santa Cruz. And so he called Rob Roscoff up and he said, I want to carry Santa Cruz in my stores. And Rob was like, no,
Yeah.
I don't want you to carry Santa Cruz in your stores. And so he got a Santa Cruz Superlight, sent it to Taiwan, and they literally copied it, like everything about it.
Yeah.
So I came in after that to sort of like take a step back and like actually design some bikes instead of just copying Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
So my that was my role there.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, Chris and I founded Niner Bikes.
Yeah. So just famously, he just says Niner Bikes, but more below, like the level below that, and more famously, Chris Sakai and Steve, napkin, drawing, right, sort of thing. I mean, it's just like the moment that you were saying, like the two of you decided, let's do this. And that's the Niner as in 29er, which, as Steve admits, we all know, they weren't the first guys to do a 29-inch wheel bike. But I mean, it's like when the Niner brand came out, everyone's kind of like, huh? It's like a whole brand dedicated just to 29-inch wheels. Because at the time, again, this is the history piece, which is always so kind of important in any discussion about modern mountain bikes. People don't understand that, it's like, because I mean, who knows what a 26-inch wheel was, right? I mean, it's like, because 29 is just what we know, or 27.5, right?
Yeah.
But there was a time in history books, kids, when, the idea of a 29-inch bike across the platform, was just like unheard of, anyways, so that was just a huge, like, moment in history when Chris and Steve decided to start Niner Bikes, which it just like steamrolled through the industry in terms of growing the popularity, and more importantly, the design and technology to go around 29-inch bike wheels, right? Because I mean, it's like you could, Westwood might have been putting 29-inch bikes wheels on his bike, and I'm sure Wes up in Crested Butte was smart enough to figure certain things out. But I mean, you guys really like full-scale production, and then even bringing in suspension in around a 29-inch wheel, which originally was kind of maybe a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But,
yep.
How did that go though? Like,
man, it was cool. Gary Fisher was doing it at the time, but he was doing it really unsuccessfully. In fact, as the history goes, Supergo was the #1 Gary Fisher dealer in the country.
Really?
And it was because they bought all of the closeout bikes at a quarter of the retail price and just blasted them through. Big wheel bikes too, even the 29-inch wheel bikes from Gary Fisher.
The 29s weren't even doing good, you mean?
No, they were tanking. Okay. Nobody wanted them. The only way they sold them was to close them out at the end of the year to Alan Goldsmith. And a lot of it was, honestly, Gary Fisher is one of the reasons we have this industry, right? You can't doubt that guy
in many ways
is as innovative as they come, but he's also incredibly eccentric.
Yep.
And the Gary Fisher brand under Trek and under Gary's supervision was kind of all over the place. The colors were all crazy. Every year it was a different logo and a different font, and I don't think that consumers were really latching themselves onto that.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, the only suspension fork available at the time was Marzocchi, which was a piece of shit. And even Marzocchi, even Bryson Martin back then would be like, that fork was terrible. So here's where it changed. Gary Fisher and Trek got RockShox to build the Reba. They paid for the license to have a 29-inch wheel Reba, and Niner was the first company to use it outside of Trek. And that really, having a legitimate front suspension fork really did change everything.
That's right. I forgot about that.
So kudos to them for putting that money in and getting that done. And that definitely helped the trajectory for Niner and for what we were doing. But I think we studied the wheel size, we studied why it was doing what it was doing, and we studied how we could combat, the 29-inch fork at the time, the Reba, was only a 39 mil rake. It was a really short rake. It was based on the 26-inch wheel. They didn't change anything. They just made it longer.
Right.
They just made a new magnesium lower for it to be longer. And so, which isn't the right decision. And we, of course, wanted to change all of that. We're like, hey, we're starting a new wheel size. Why would we use standards off the 26-inch wheel? But, we had what we had to work with, which was a 29-inch wheel Reba with a 39 millimeter rake. And that was what we had to work with. So, we did crazy things like a 72-degree head tube angle because the the trail numbers worked out way better with that steeper head tube and that short rake. With the longer wheel.
Because you're going into this kind of detail, and just remember, like, I do remember, like, back then, it's like, so with Fisher, they had the 29ers, but it just seemed like, it was just like, big company and just kind of like a little marketing gloss with, Gary Fisher, who was, always worthy of time and energy. But I just thinking back now to the time when, like, talking to you guys back then with you and Chris and stuff about it just seemed like you guys spent so much more time on those kind of technical details about the bike versus just saying, it rolls over everything so much better and it's in red, right, or something like that. Not to discount the amount of design or technology that anyone else put into it, but again, that's the thing. Again, which leads us to this bike. The level of detail that you've been responsible for has always been the thing. It's just like that's like the stand back to me. It's like, wow, they're not just doing this like putting 29-inch wheels and going to you think it through. So then from the 29er, I mean, it was. How soon after 29, you left 29er back to Domahidy Designs? I know you did your own name brand bikes for a while.
Yeah.
And then I think the next time you popped up in my life, at least on the radar, was with the Factor.
Yeah.
The Factor road bike, which was this incredible, like, again, stop what you're doing. This road bike is unlike anything else you've ever seen before. And there's still versions, they've sort of downsized it and took the fork away and changed, but I know there's still a few elements on I think it's called the Factor 1 or something like that.
Yep, the Factor 1 was
it became.
Yeah.
But it was just this radical road bike with like a twin spar fork. I mean, there's so much about it, the split down tube and a split seat tube.
The seat tube at the bottom split, right around the bottom bracket.
Right.
We actually had this really cool arrow pass through, so the bottom bracket actually had a wing foil down the middle of it. Most people didn't ever notice that because it was like, it's pretty hard to see through that whole thing. But
and that was the Factor Vis-Rise?
Vis-Res,
So anyone should look that up. Factor V-I-S and then V-R-I-E-S?
V-I-R-E-S, Res.
Incredible road bike. And then what came after Factor?
I spent 4 years setting up Argonaut cycles.
That's right.
So Argonaut was outsourcing their carbon to a different factory in Washington, White Salmon, Washington.
Right.
And Ben Farver wanted to bring production in-house, so I designed a brand new road bike, brand new gravel bike, and patented the molding technology that they use for for building bikes in-house.
Right.
So I opened a carbon factory basically in Bend, Oregon.
Wow.
For Factor, and that was 4 years of work.
Oh, no kidding, huh?
Yeah.
And so all of that from working at the Bikeology bike shop in Santa Monica for Alan Goldsmith, and we love you, Alan, full circle, and then we end up with this incredible piece of mountain bike technology, which I saw the first time, I was just scrolling on websites back in the day, or earlier this year, and I saw this bike, saw his name attached to it, and it blew me away. So, I mean, I called him and we did a big interview for my website, but this thing, I mean, it's just like, there's a lot of, eye-catching mountain bikes out there right now, but this one just blew me away. I don't even know where to begin, but why don't you pick somewhere to begin in terms of what the notion is behind this bike? What are we trying to achieve with this?
Well, Viral Bikes is the company that I morphed Domahidy Designs into, and I decided very early on that I was going to dedicate Viral to new drivetrain technology. I do think the derailleur is an antiquated device in the mountain bike world. I don't think we should be trying to force these huge ratios into a mountain bike on a cassette and a chain and a derailleur. It just to me makes zero sense. And the guys at Pinion, started about a decade ago. And I've been riding Pinion gearbox bikes for 7 years. I've been building and riding Pinion gearbox bikes for 7 years. Yeah. Wow. So, this was going to be my first full suspension bike with the Pinion gearbox, and I just wanted to make sure it was a doozy. I've had some pretty radical concept bikes that I had sketched out. I have a 3D rendering of a single-sided swing arm high pivot.
That's right. I remember that. You showed me
gearbox
that.
bike.
Right,
yeah.
Right. As if this one in itself isn't radical.
It's not radical enough. In all honesty, it's not as radical as it might look. I mean, 3D printing, I wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible. I built this, at my home, in
the garage,
in Rockland, California, and a lot of the stuff that I learned at Argonaut, I've been able to sort of make work on this bike. I learned bonding, and I learned layup technology, and I learned carbon. For Argonaut, I hand laid up every single bike that went through prototyping for the
really?
entire 4 years.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it was me laying up carbon and doing the carbon, cutting the carbon on the Automatrix printer,
Right.
and literally doing it myself until it passed testing, and then it would go into production, and I would teach the production department how to do the layup and
Right.
show them the layup schedule and all that kind of stuff. So I learned an incredible amount through the process of opening my own carbon factory, or opening, not my own, Argonaut's own carbon factory in Bend, Oregon.
Yep.
And it was able to apply a lot of that learning know-how into this bike. So
The lugs are 3D printed in London or England, you said?
England, yeah. So I worked with this company called Metron Additive Manufacturing, and they do, they're pretty incredible. The technology that they're using is really incredible. It's called EBM, which is electron beam melting, and it's kind of a version of powder bed fusion, which is laser sintering. DMLS is what the acronym is for most stuff. But anyway,
No, just keep going as if we all know what you're talking about.
Yeah, what's the EBM technology basically in a nutshell is the print bed that they 3D print the parts on is actually at 700 degrees Celsius, which is the annealing temperature of titanium. So it's basically being heat treated as it's being made.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so there's a laser making each layer, and as that laser is laying on the powder bed to the powder of the titanium to the part, it's also heat treating it at the same time. So every single layer gets added onto and heat treated to the whole part as it's being built. It's pretty amazing. So that's the technology that I used, and I just, it took me a long time to figure out the kinematics of the suspension that I wanted, but I wanted a layout that allowed me to have a straight C-post the whole way through and a totally open front triangle, so we could put water bottles or bags or whatever you want.
Put what? Water bottle?
Water bottles and the cage to hold it.
Oh my God, that's crazy talk. Water bottle cage. And so it's carbon tubes, titanium lugs. How much travel is on the back out of the back end?
160 rear travel and 170. That one's 170 mil travel fork.
How close to production could this be, do you think?
I got some testing to do. I actually did full fatigue testing on this frame, so it actually passed all of the ISO testing and stuff, which is pretty wild. But it's not. It's a little too flexy.
Yeah.
And the reason that is because the parts in the FEA are within the yield strength and fatigue strength of the titanium. But it was difficult for me to calculate the flexation numbers without having a physical sample. So now that I've built this physical sample, I've been able to do stiffness numbers on it for lateral and vertical stiffness in the real world, and then back those into the FEA analysis. So,
what does this bike represent in terms of it's here it is in this place in history, but in terms of as a platform for future thinking for you? Because we spent, at the Bike Summit earlier this week, we talked about futurist technology and kind of like the vision of what could be. But what do you see in this bike, or what was your intent with this bike, where you can see as kind of like a springboard for what we haven't seen yet, and on a bigger scale?
So the industry is moving largely towards the supply chain. During COVID screwed the whole industry, right? Like it went into pure chaos, and everybody thought there was going to be this big boom, and there was for a blip of a second, and now everything's kind of returning back to normal. But people are trying to figure out the supply chain and how they can be a little bit more resilient. And anybody who's not looking at the resiliency of the industry really is off the back. They need to be, right? So with something like this, I can produce a frame pretty quickly as it's ordered. I can do on delivery order. So somebody gives me an order, and then a month later they can have a bike. So 4-week delay, but I'm only building to order. I'm not putting out money or resources to a bike just sitting in a box, collecting dust. So the other thing that really hasn't been done very well in the mountain bike world is custom geometry. And to some extent, you don't need custom geometry on a mountain bike, right? Your body's moving around. It doesn't need to be as precise as a road bike geometry, right? But that being said, some people want dropper posts that are not wireless, right? So I can print a hole for a proper, wired dropper, a cabled dropper post. Somebody wants a lyric instead of a Zeb. I can actually build the geometry around a 160 travel fork instead of a 170 travel fork, or I can play around with how tall their head tubes are. They don't have to stack like 10, 15 spacers under their stem to get the right bar height. I can actually print a longer head tube.
Right.
And do custom geometry for people that actually makes sense in the mountain bike side of things.
As we talked a few months ago, I mean, we sort of had a sort of noting about like where derailleur technology and drivetrain technology, and SRAM was just done amazing flagship work in terms of drivetrain transmission technology evolution. But you had made the comment about like the direction we need to go is not just bigger and bigger cassettes and derailleurs that are getting closer and closer to the ground to accommodate the bigger and bigger have these pizza pans in the back. I mean, do you think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will there even be derailleurs? I mean,
no.
Yeah.
10 years from now, no, not in the mountain bike world. I mean, the only place I see the derailleur sort of still existing is weight cross country, like 1% of the Nino Schurters of the world who are demanding like top like performance that no other human needs, right? Except for the 20 people he's racing.
Right.
But that's not, people who are building bikes to those specs and trying to sell them to the 99.9% of the rest of us. I think is missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Racing drives innovation, and definitely it needs to exist and it needs to help drive that innovation. But I think taking Nino Schurter's bike and then selling it to to you, Zap, is something
missing the point.
It's not what the consumer would really want.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they want it because it looks cool and it says Nino on it and it's the bike that he rode, but there just nobody but Nino needs that bike, right? So the drivetrain, the cassette is a really interesting thing that people don't think about very often. When you think about a cassette, you think about like, oh, you have this range. You have a 1052 cassette. That's a 520% range. But what you don't understand is that the range is dictated by teeth, right?
Yeah.
Like you can go from 10 tooth to 11 tooth. That's only a 10% jump. Or you can go from a 10 tooth to a 12 tooth. That's a 20% jump. But you can't do anything in between, right? You can't do a half tooth. You can't do something in between. So you're stuck. Your cassette is stuck by the teeth that you're allowed to jump. So if you want to go from 36 to 42, that's 6 teeth. So that's like still not quite 20%. You're still kind of stuck in some gray area, or you go to 41, but now SRAM is stuck in the even size. They're even more stuck because the new transmission is only even sized numbers. Because they're doing narrow wide on the cassette, they can only do even cogs. So now they're stuck even more. The range is set what it is. You can go 10, 12, 14, 16, or you can go 18, So the gearbox allows you to do whatever you want to do. This 600% range gearbox has exactly 17.7% jumps between every single gear.
Wow. Okay.
And they're not controlled by something as arbitrary as a tooth.
Got it. Where's Pinion from?
Germany.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Really impressive.
Yeah.
So my favorite question, the last question, is question we talked about before, but so you've done all this work on bicycles, road bikes, Gatante, Alan Goldsmith, yada, 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 Ben up in Oregon. You're a bike guy. What is it about the bicycle that, again, you find so endearing?
Yeah, I've answered this with you a few times.
I know, I just like hearing you say
no
it.
problem. For the freedom of the bike is just the coolest thing ever. My ability to get out into the middle of nowhere within a few pedal strokes, efficiently, fast, with the wind blowing in your hair, and just seeing the expanse of whatever nature has to give you is one of the coolest things. It's kind of why I'm more a mountain bike than I am a road or gravel bike guy.
Yeah.
I just love being in the mountains. I also love speed. I love the wind blowing in my hair and then around my glasses and just railing some trail down. The climb is always the hardest for me. The descent is always the most fun for me. But the freedom of it all is just the expression that really, truly brings home the desire of bikes.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for bringing your beautiful bike down. Viral.
Yeah.
How do people find out more about your bike?
Viral.bike.
Viral.bike.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming to Bentonville. And again, just a beautiful piece that's, again, I think it's you know, complementary to the history books as any bike in terms of mountain bike. That it's just in terms of what it's creating and what it's trying to, you know, the signature it's trying to make. So good for you.
Thanks, Sap.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
appreciate it. Thanks for your time.